Today is Saturday, February 19th, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. For over a year now, almost a year and a half, I've been publishing talks on topics related to classical Catholic education. And while I have received a lot of feedback on these talks, and I trust that many of the talks have been helpful because I know that the content that I share, the ideas that I discuss, especially the application of those ideas, is not commonly available today. But what I'd like to begin to do in my recordings is move from general theoretical discussions to actual studies of the classical Catholic curriculum. I'd like to spend more time actually reading from the classical texts themselves and reading in a way that helps listeners to understand and providing a little bit of commentary along the way to try to make things as clear as possible. I'm going to read slowly when I read. I'm going to repeat things when I read. And I'm going to do my best to make these readings profitable for those who listen. In tonight's recording, I'd like to begin reading a book on classical arithmetic, the first of the arts of the Quadrivium. There are a number of possible sources. One of them is the Introduction to Arithmetic by Nicomachus. Another one is the De Arithmetica of Boethius, and a third is a book published, or I should say assembled, by a 19th century philosopher and translator named Thomas Taylor, whose translations I often use in my philosophy and reasoning classes. And he put together a book titled Theoretic Arithmetic, which compiles the writings of many of history's most brilliant classical arithmeticians. And I find this to be a very helpful source on classical arithmetic. It largely presents us with the arithmetic of Boethius, but adds some other insights and sources which I find to be very helpful. So I'd like in this recording to read chapter 1 of book 1, which discusses the priority of arithmetic with relation to the other mathematical disciplines of the Quadrivium. So let's study together chapter 1 of book 1 of Thomas Taylor's Theoretic Arithmetic, which is the official text of the Classical Arithmetic course in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. Arithmetic is to be learned the first of the mathematical sciences because it has the relation of a principal and mother to all the rest. Arithmetic is to be learned the first of the mathematical sciences because it has the relation of a principal and mother to all the rest. For it is prior to all of them. Arithmetic is prior to the other mathematical sciences. Arithmetic is prior to music, geometry, and astronomy. Arithmetic is prior to all of them, not only because the fabricator of the universe, the creator, employed arithmetic as the first paradigm or pattern of his distributed intellection or his applied understanding and wisdom. Arithmetic is prior to all of them not only because the fabricator of the universe employed arithmetic as the first paradigm of his distributed intellection, and constituted all things according to number. But the priority of arithmetic is also evinced by this, that whenever that which is prior by nature is subverted, that which is posterior is at the same time subverted. But when that which is posterior perishes, that which is prior suffers no essential mutation of its former condition. Let me read that again, and then I'll provide a brief explanation. So the first proof that Taylor offers us that arithmetic is the first of the mathematical arts or sciences is that it was the first paradigm or pattern that God used when He designed the creation of the world, because all things were created according to number. And we see this even in Genesis chapter 1. We see how number is present in the revelation of the truth concerning the creation of the world in many different ways. But Taylor here offers a second proof that arithmetic is the first of the mathematical sciences. He says, the priority of arithmetic is also evinced or proven by this. And he gives us this general principle. Whenever that which is prior by nature is subverted, that which is posterior is at the same time subverted. Anytime that which is prior by nature is subverted, that which is posterior is also subverted at the same time. If arithmetic by nature comes before geometry, if we subvert arithmetic, if we were to destroy arithmetic, would geometry thereby be destroyed? The answer is yes, because we would not be able to understand geometry if arithmetic did not exist. If arithmetic does not exist, then geometry cannot exist. And since the existence of geometry depends on the existence of arithmetic, it's proven that arithmetic is prior to geometry by nature, and the same is true of music and astronomy. The other three arts of the Quadrivium depend for their existence on the existence of arithmetic. If there's no arithmetic, there can be no geometry, there can be no music, there can be no astronomy. These depend on arithmetic, proving that arithmetic is prior to them by nature. Taylor then says, but when that which is posterior, that which comes after, perishes, then that which is prior suffers no essential mutation, no essential change from its former or original condition. If we were to destroy geometry, would arithmetic be destroyed? No, arithmetic wouldn't change. If we were to destroy music, if music didn't exist, would arithmetic cease to exist? No, arithmetic would not be changed by the destruction of music, and the same is true of astronomy. When that which is posterior is destroyed, that which is prior is not affected. And this is another proof that arithmetic is prior by nature to the other mathematical arts. Taylor then gives us an illustration. If you take away the genus animal, then the nature of man is immediately destroyed. If you take away animal, man is destroyed. And the reason why is because the definition of man, the essence of man, depends upon the existence of animal. The definition of man is a rational animal. The ideas of rational and animal have to exist before man can be defined. And so man is dependent on the existence of the idea animal. If you take away animal, the nature of man is immediately destroyed. In other words, if we were to take the genus of things that are named animal, and that genus was no longer allowed to exist, everything within that genus would be destroyed. All of the different species of animals would be destroyed because the species come after the genus. Animal comes first, and the different species follow. Man is contained in the genus animal. Animal, therefore, is prior by nature to man. Taylor goes on to say, but by taking away man, if we take away man, that is the species within the genus, animal, the genus, will not perish. On the contrary, those things are always posterior, which together with themselves introduce something else. And this is sort of a third proof for the priority of arithmetic. We could say this is an argument of co-introduction. Those things which are always posterior, those things which come after, those things which are secondary or which follow, introduce something else. And we saw this in the definition of man. The definition of man introduces the idea of animal. That which is posterior always introduces something prior. Those that have a priority of subsistence, those that are prior by nature, when they are enunciated or spoken, co-introduce with themselves nothing of a posterior nature. When a prior thing is spoken, nothing posterior is introduced with it. So to make this clear from Taylor's illustration, if I introduce the idea of animal, man is not introduced. Man is posterior to animal. I can speak about animal all that I want without saying anything about man, because animal is prior to man. But if I speak about man, I can't speak about man without introducing, co-introducing the idea of animal. I can't even define man without introducing the idea of animal. And this proves that animal is prior to man. Taylor explains, if you speak of man, you will at the same time introduce animal, for man is an animal. But if you speak of animal, you will not at the same time introduce the species man, for animal is not the same as man. The same thing is seen to take place in geometry and arithmetic. If you take away numbers, that is arithmetic, whence will triangle or quadrangle or whatever else is the subject of geometry subsist? If you take away numbers, how will you speak of a triangle or a quadrangle or any other figure? The figures of geometry cannot be introduced without first introducing ideas from arithmetic. All of these names of figures are denominative of numbers. They name numbers. They assume the knowledge of numbers. They assume the existence of numbers. However, if we were to take away triangle and quadrangle, and the whole of geometry was subverted, if we destroyed geometry, the numbers 3, 4, and the appellations or names of other numbers would not perish. Destroying geometry, destroying the triangle, would not destroy the number 3. Destroying the rectangle or square would not destroy the number 4. And so that which is posterior is proven to be so by the fact that if it was destroyed, it does not destroy that which is prior to it, and when it is spoken, it introduces what is prior to it, because we cannot speak about what is posterior without introducing what is prior. Taylor goes on to say again, when we speak of any geometrical figure, it is at the same time connected with some numerical appellation. Anytime we speak about a geometrical figure, it's connected with some name that depends on the knowledge of numbers. But when we speak of numbers in arithmetic, we do not at the same time introduce any geometrical figure or any geometrical ideas. Now Taylor moves on to another proof. Proofs that arithmetic is in fact the first of the mathematical arts. He goes on and says, the priority likewise of numbers, that is arithmetic, to music may from hence be especially demonstrated that not only those things which subsist by themselves are naturally prior to those which are referred to something else, but musical modulation itself is stamped with numerical appellations. He actually presents two proofs here that arithmetic is prior to music. And I have to explain some of the terms he uses to make this clear. He says, not only things which subsist by themselves. Now, when we look at the four arts of the quadrivium, we see arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy, the four arts of the quadrivium, and these relate to four different subjects, four different species of quantities. The first division of quantity is into magnitude and multitude. And when we look at multitude, multitude divides into absolute multitude and relative multitude. Absolute multitude is the subject of the art of arithmetic, and relative multitude is the subject of the art of music. So when he says here, the priority of numbers to music may be demonstrated that not only those things which subsist by themselves, what he means there is multitudes that are absolute. They subsist by themselves. They stand alone. They're understood by themselves. That's what absolute multitude refers to. As opposed to those which are referred to something else. Those which are referred to something else are relative multitudes. So he's referring there to absolute multitudes, which are the subject of arithmetic, and relative multitudes, which are the subject of music. And he says, that which subsists by itself is prior to that which is referred to something else. Logically, because to refer something to something else, for something to be relative, something else has to already be known, an antecedent to which it relates as a relative. So absolute multitudes are prior to relative multitudes, and therefore arithmetic is prior to music. That's one proof, and the other, he says, is that the musical modulations, the names of the intervals that we'll learn as we study the art of classical music, the different ratios or intervals or modulations in music are named with number, just like the figures in geometry. So the knowledge of music assumes the knowledge of arithmetic. This is another proof that arithmetic is prior to music. And now he gives us some examples. He says, the same thing may take place in this, that is music, which has already been noticed in geometry. For diatessaron, diapente, and diapason, these are three different musical modulations which he just referred to. So don't be distracted by these fancy names. We'll study them in classical music. These names of musical modulations are denominated by the antecedent names of numbers. These are named based on the pre-existing names of numbers. The proportion, likewise, of sounds to each other is found in numbers alone. For the sound which subsists in the symphony diapason is in a duple or double ratio. The modulation diatessaron consists in the ratio of 4 to 3. That which is called the symphony diapente is conjoined by the ratio of 3 to 2. That which is in numbers sesquioctave is a tone in music. Now, that's a lot of technical information about the art of music, and you don't need to understand any of that. It's simply being presented as an illustration to show that we can't even talk about music unless we first understand the concept of numbers, absolute multitudes. So don't be distracted or discouraged by a difficult paragraph when all he's doing is showing you a very simple fact that you cannot talk about the different modulations in classical music unless you already know the concepts of classical arithmetic. That's all that you need to understand there. That's all that he's saying. He's simply providing an example to illustrate that. In short, he said, the priority of arithmetic to music will be indubitably demonstrated in the course of this work. So far he's shown us how arithmetic can be proven to be prior to geometry, and then he just showed us how arithmetic can be proven to be prior to music. Geometry and music so far. Now he goes on to say, but since geometry and music, since both geometry and music, which have been proven posterior to arithmetic, since both of them are prior to astronomy, it follows that astronomy is in a still greater degree posterior to arithmetic. So the proof that astronomy is posterior to arithmetic is that astronomy actually follows geometry and music, which have already been proven to follow arithmetic. For in this science, that is the science of astronomy, in this science, the circle, the sphere, the center, parallel lines, and the axis are considered, all of which pertain to the geometric discipline, all of which require the knowledge of geometry. Hence also, the senior power of geometry may from this be shown. This is another proof that geometry comes first, before astronomy. The senior power of geometry may from this be shown, that all motion comes after rest. All motion is posterior to rest. And that permanency is always naturally prior to mobility. So Taylor here, remember, he's simply compiling the teaching of the ancient mathematicians, presents us with two universal truths. First of all, that rest comes before motion, and secondly, that permanency comes before mobility. Astronomy is the science or doctrine of what is movable. Astronomy is the doctrine of magnitude in motion. Geometry is the art of magnitude at rest. So since objects at rest are prior to objects in motion, geometry is prior to astronomy. Very simple proof. The motion of the stars, likewise, is celebrated as being accompanied with harmonic modulations. The motions of the stars, studied in astronomy, are celebrated as being accompanied with harmonic modulations. So we understand in astronomy ideas that assume the prior knowledge of music, or relative multitude. Whence it appears that the power of music precedes in antiquity the course of the stars. And it cannot be doubted that arithmetic naturally surpasses astronomy, since it appears to be more ancient than geometry and music, which are prior to astronomy. For by numbers we collect the rising and setting of the stars, the swiftness and slowness of the planets, the eclipses and manifold variations of the moon. All of these ideas that we use to speak about astronomy assume the prior knowledge of arithmetic. And that brings us to the end of this first chapter in Taylor's Theoretic Arithmetic. So you can see in this first chapter, we take our time to prove, without any question, that arithmetic is the first of the four arts of the Quadrivium, the four classical mathematical arts. Arithmetic is first. And this proves for us that our study of the Quadrivium should begin with arithmetic, because the other arts and sciences, geometry, music, astronomy, assume and require the prior knowledge of arithmetic. And just to provide us with the introductory chapter for this study of classical arithmetic, Taylor, following the teaching of Boethius, takes the time as a good teacher to prove that we're starting where we should, with arithmetic, and he explains why we're starting with arithmetic. So we're going to begin the study of arithmetic, study the doctrine of numbers, or absolute multitude. And once we learn the basics of absolute multitude, of arithmetic, we can then begin the study of geometry and music. And when we learn the principles of geometry and music, we'll then be prepared to enter into the study of astronomy. which is exactly how the courses are arranged in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. So we've established in this first chapter that arithmetic is the first of the mathematical disciplines, which was the chapter of the title, on the priority of arithmetic to the other mathematical disciplines. I hope that's a helpful reading and discussion of this first chapter. I intend to move through this book and many others, the master texts of the classical liberal arts, with this slow reading and commentary, so that by listening, you can gain experience in these works, become familiar with the content of these works, and at the same time, gain some understanding, which might be difficult if the readings are just presented like a modern audiobook and just read through from beginning to end. So I hope that that's helpful. Having listened to this reading, I encourage you to listen to it repeatedly. And if you have any questions, if there's anything that's unclear or you'd like to talk about, please use the course support forum on the Classical Arithmetic course page in the Academy Study Center, which you're welcome to study for free. I hope that that's helpful. God bless your studies.